Hi, everybody. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to you. I want to welcome everyone to our workshop today, Evaluation Use in Multilateral Development Institutions. Our speaker today is Dr. Jos Vaessen, who is an evaluation advisor of the Independent Evaluation Group from the World Bank. Today's event is sponsored by American University's Measurement and Evaluation Program. At American University, we are committed to pursuing inclusive excellence. One of our practices, shared from our Indigenous Native communities, is to offer a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our meetings and events. The goal is to build our mindfulness of historical processes in which we still participate. American University is founded on the unceded land of the Nacotchtank, Anacostan, and Piscataway peoples. I ask you to join me in acknowledging these communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. American University also acknowledges that it was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, including those on whose land this institution is located. With this acknowledgement, we commit to working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Those of you who attend our events know that we always provide a land acknowledgement. I would encourage you to take this a step forward and do some research on the land where you are sitting. If you are not aware of the history of the land, you can click on the link in the chat to research it or send a text to the number in the chat as well. Thank you, Gabby. Okay, as we get started, I would like to introduce myself and my colleague moderating today's webinar. My name is Yasmin Shimshek, and I'm joined by my colleague, Gabby Huff, excuse me. We are both students at AU's Measurement and Evaluation Program. We will be moderating the Zoom and the Facebook Live questions today. Thank you.
So before we get started today, I know we've spoken with a few of you so far, but if you want to share where you're joining us from in the chat, I would love to be able to see who we've got in the room. So go ahead and put that in the chat in Facebook or in Zoom. Minnesota, welcome, Lisa. Glad to have you. I'm in Wisconsin, so we're close by. DC, welcome, Elizabeth. Martin from the Netherlands, great. Ghana, welcome, Isaac. Switzerland as well. Great.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, thank you for coming. And we're glad to have everybody with us today. So if I missed anyone, go ahead and put it in the chat. We love to see where you are from, but I'm going to pass it back over to Yasmin to get us going.
Yeah, and it doesn't look like we have anybody joining with us on Facebook just yet, but welcome again, and thank you for joining us on our workshop. If you have any questions for the presenter, please put them in the Q&A section. Looks like we're just going to be using the chat for now. It's open, you can chat throughout, but we will be saving some time for questions at the end of the presentation. So welcome, Dr. Vaessen, and thank you for speaking with us today. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Gabby and Yasmin, for the very thoughtful and excellent introduction. I really appreciated that. So, esteemed colleagues, participants, nice to meet you. I look forward to a good conversation about the topic of evaluation use in multilateral development institutions. It's quite a daunting topic because we are talking about a big universe of institutions, but I hope to be able to break it down and have a good conversation on this topic. Let me see. Oh, yeah. Are you seeing the next slide now? Yep. Okay. I see Gabby nodding. Yeah.
Yes, we are. Go right ahead.
Excellent. So I will be talking about 5 points. I will start with some caveats, which I think is good to know when we talk about this complex topic. Secondly, I'll give a short introduction about what we mean with independent evaluation in multilateral development organizations. I will then go on to talk about the topic of evaluation use, just a little bit of theory, and then over into practice, what this means for the practice of multilateral development organizations such as multilateral development banks, and UN organizations. And then I will close with some final reflections. So basically, we're talking about a big topic. I'm sorry, I'm trying to make something disappear. I can see my notes, but that's not really working. Yeah, now it's working. Talking about evaluation use in multilateral development institutions is a big topic. There's quite a lot of heterogeneity across multilateral development organizations. In a moment, I will show you a little bit of the institutional landscape that we are talking about. We are talking literally about hundreds of organizations. So it's obviously quite difficult to generalize about such a large group, quite diverse group of organizations as well. And I should be very clear about my own view on this issue. So I worked in the UN. I consulted for several UN organizations, and I was a staff member in one United Nations agency. I also consulted for multiple multilateral development banks, and I'm currently a staff member of one of them, the World Bank. So I have a reasonable helicopter overview, but still there's a lot of diversity to capture here. I will use the World Bank often as an example to elucidate broader patterns. And there I'm very clear that I will be talking about particularly the larger multilateral development banks and the larger UN organizations such as UNDP, UNICEF, or WFP. So with these caveats, I would like to kick off with some of the content. Evaluation functions. It's very important to delimit what we are talking about. I would like to talk about three layers of evaluation functions in multilateral development organization. First of all, there is independent evaluation. And with independent, I mean evaluation functions that are structurally, functionally, and behaviorally independent of the operational side of the organization. Structurally means that these functions have their own budgets, they have their own HR policies, and they do not report to the operations side of the organization, but directly to the board of directors or the board of member states. So they are fully independent of the operational part of the organization, which is important if you have critical things to say about the work of that organization. Functional independence means that you can basically decide on what you evaluate and how you do it. And behavioral independence refers to, let's say, the ethical principles that every evaluator should embrace when trying to do evaluative work in an as unbiased way as possible. Independent evaluation in multilateral development organizations is often concentrated in central evaluation offices at the headquarters of the organization. But in some UN organizations, you also have a decentralized structure where you have from the central evaluation office, from the independent evaluation office, also officers in regions or in countries. And the second layer is embedded evaluation. So we're talking here about separate evaluation functions that are not structurally and sometimes not even functionally independent of the operations side, but they do evaluative work. They also commission and conduct evaluations. And they are often part of programs within the organizations. They could also be embedded in, let's say, trust fund based programs, or smaller UN organizations would have these evaluation units that are not fully independent of management or operations. And then embedded evaluation also includes all those evaluation practices that are really integrated in operational work and that are conducted by colleagues who are not necessarily evaluators, but may commission or conduct some evaluative work. And the final layer is research, which is not really part of the evaluation landscape, but research also includes impact evaluation, and a lot of the impact evaluation work can more usefully be classified as research, as it is not in any way linked directly to the operational practice of the organization or to the governance bodies of the organization, such as the boards of member states or directors. So this as a background, and feel free to, if you have questions, we can take this up later again in the discussion. A little bit about the institutional landscape. The United Nations system may be familiar to you. It's a quite heterogeneous and large system. It has the Secretariat, it has the Economic and Social Council, it has the Assembly, which also includes the funds and programs like UNDP, UNICEF, and it includes also the specialized agencies such as ILO, UNESCO, WFP, etc. So it's a quite broad system. There are more than 60 evaluation functions in the United Nations system. Many of them are independent, especially in the larger agencies or larger parts of the UN. But many of them are also embedded, so they are not independent of management. And most of these evaluation functions are members of the United Nations Evaluation Group, which is a network for evaluation in the UN. Next to that, we have the multilateral development banks and the vertical funds, which can be classified into global and regional multilateral development banks. These are the biggest ones, like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, and so on. Then you also have sub-regional multilateral development banks, such as the Caribbean Development Bank or the Central American Bank for Economic Integration. And you have a number of vertical funds, like the Green Climate Fund, the Global Partnership for Education, and so on. Most of these MDBs and vertical funds, they have independent evaluation functions. Some of them have only embedded evaluation functions. The network for evaluation is called the Evaluation Cooperation Group. And in contrast to the United Nations, the ECG is much more restrictive when it comes to membership. So only independent evaluation functions with a certain size and also complying with a number of other criteria can be members of the Evaluation Cooperation Group. So this is a little bit as background to the system that we are talking about. So how is evaluation organized? I'm showing here a very simplified picture of the World Bank Group, which includes the public sector, the private sector, lending and advisory work that the group does, which is World Bank, IFC, and MIGA. This kind of organization is quite representative for the larger MDBs and the larger UN organizations. So you basically have an independent evaluation function that reports to the board of member states or the board of directors from different countries, and also to senior management. And in case of the multilateral development banks, not only do the independent evaluation functions conduct independent evaluations, they also validate the self-evaluations that are kind of standardized across the organizational system. Which brings me to the second category, which is embedded evaluations. And there are two broad types. One is the kind of standardized self-evaluations that are conducted on projects. This is especially characteristic of multilateral development banks, and a little bit less for the UN. And then you have a second set of embedded evaluations, which are all sorts of programmatic and thematic evaluations and other sorts of evaluations that are conducted by embedded evaluation entities or by colleagues whose main job is to be involved in operations work rather than evaluation. So some of the patterns and differences across this large institutional system that I'm talking about, I would like to discern a little bit between the larger MDBs and the UN to give you a little bit more of a taste of how it is organized. In large MDBs, you have standardized self-evaluations. They are conducted on a on a unit of analysis, which is the project, because many of the development banks are still organized around projects. This is less the case in the UN, where there are more different ways of working and less concentrated around projects as unit of analysis. So that also means that self-evaluation is much less consistent. It's done in different ways. The multilateral development banks have a fairly low ratio of evaluation budget in relation to the total financing volume of their operations. Whereas in the UN, you have a fairly high ratio of the evaluation budget in relation to the financial volume of operations. For example, I used to work in UNESCO, and the evaluation function, the independent evaluation function of UNESCO has about let's say 15 times less budget than the independent evaluation function of the World Bank. But the World Bank is hundreds of times much bigger in terms of financing volume than UNESCO. So there's a different ratio between the dollars, the evaluation dollars that you have per dollar of intervention that is being supported or being implemented. Of course, the comparison is not a perfect one, because different organizations have different mandates, and some are more network organizations, but it gives you a picture that is fairly clear. The multilateral development banks also have a much stronger distinction between independent and embedded evaluation, whereas in the UN you will find evaluation functions that are fully independent, or sometimes kind of they have some independence but not fully, or they are more embedded, and the distinctions are less clear. The multilateral development banks all have centralized evaluation functions, whereas in the UN there are some large UN organizations such as UNDP, UNICEF, UN Women, that also have decentralized evaluation advisors in regions and sometimes even in countries, and they are connected to the independent evaluation function. So these are some of the broader patterns on how evaluation is organized. So let us now turn to the topic of evaluation use, and just a very little bit of theory. There are many frameworks and theories around evaluation use. I particularly like this one, which is developed by McNulty, and who distinguishes between direct, indirect, and non-use. So direct use basically refers to evaluations directly informing, for example, strategic decision-making. So there can be an evaluation that informs a budget discussion or the development of a new strategy directly. Indirect use can be, for example, conceptual. That has to do with Weiss's concept of enlightenment. You write a very nice report with interesting findings, and over time, different people read it, and it influences their thinking and their actions in the organization, for example, or the organizational system. Another form of indirect use is process use, where as evaluator or evaluation team, you try to involve your operations colleagues or partners from government or from civil society in the evaluation process. So these stakeholders develop some sense of ownership of the evaluation process and are more likely to learn or do something with the findings and recommendations. And then an important form of indirect use is also symbolic use. So the idea that evaluation is sometimes misused, there is kind of a window dressing around evaluation, where everybody is very positive about the fact that evaluations are being done, but not necessarily the evaluations have any influence on practice. And this is something, of course, that we want to avoid as evaluators. And then finally, there's non-use, which can be justified if you produce reports of bad quality, or you produce reports on climate financing just after the strategy has been completed, or just after the community of parties of the UNFCCC. Well, then you're not delivering the evaluation at the right time, so it may not be that useful. There can also be unjustified non-use, where some stakeholders try to make the evaluation disappear because it's too critical, or they do not want the evaluation findings coming to the surface, and that is also something that as evaluators, of course, we want to avoid. So this is a little bit as background. So how does this work out in practice? Direct use can mean different things, but one very prevalent system that you find in the UN and in the MDB world is that there is a formal process of sharing evaluation reports with management. Some kind of management response is developed by the operational management part of the organization. Then a management plan, an action plan is developed, and that action plan is being followed up upon by the evaluation function. And then the evaluation function again reports to the board about what the operations side is doing with recommendations. So basically you have multiple touch points with the board. First, you present your findings and recommendations to the board, and the board tries to nudge the operations side to undertake action. And then the second touch point is when, as evaluation function, you report back on what the operations side has actually done in recent years with regards to recommendations of past evaluations. So these are all mechanisms to incentivize the operations side to act upon evaluation findings and recommendations. When we talk about evaluation use, I like to talk about what we call a whole of evaluation process theory of evaluation use. That basically means that in whatever phase of the evaluation you are, whether you are planning it, whether you're conducting it, whether you're disseminating it, there are things that you can do to enhance the likelihood that your evaluation findings or insights or recommendations are influential. For example, during the implementation phase, if you have an explicit collaborative approach in which you involve different stakeholders in the process explicitly, you have consultations, you have workshops, etc., you enhance the likelihood that there will be process use. So there will be some development of some sense of ownership that can help make the evaluation more influential. Or, for example, by strengthening the depth of analysis or the reliability or the validity of findings, you can potentially enhance the likelihood that the evaluation report offers the type of quality and content that is useful to different stakeholders, and they might learn from the report. So you have a conceptual use that may be supported by this type of actions. I'll talk a little bit more about that. It is useful for an evaluation function to think about how you think. It's useful to hypothesize how you think evaluation work might change the levels of awareness, knowledge, attitudes, incentives, and eventually behaviors of key audiences, and how that might help the organization forward and make the organization more relevant and effective in its work. So we, for example, in the World Bank, we developed a theory of change for independent evaluation. And if you look a little bit more deeply into the theory of change, it hypothesizes how different aspects of different phases of the evaluation process can potentially enhance the likelihood that an evaluation is more useful. To give you some examples, timing, again, is a very important factor. During the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, you have to be very, very clear on what is really the priority for evaluation. You don't want to operations colleagues are working 24 hours to waste their time, and you want to make sure that the evaluations that you do are as useful as possible. When you develop the evaluation methodology, you need to make sure that you have the right expertise on your team, but also from experience, it's often that on the operations side or even at the level of the board, people look at who was involved in this evaluation, and are these respectable people? Are these people that know their trade? So who is on the team can be an influential factor in itself. Then is, of course, the importance of having a clear design, a strong design, and strong quality assurance. As a basic kind of heuristic, when an evaluation is very positive about what happens in a particular program or area of work, then you don't need to worry too much about methodology. But as soon as you start sharing critical findings, methodology becomes really important, because you will need to defend your position. And there are interest groups, stakeholders who will want to attack, who will attack the reliability and quality of your report. Also very important in the evaluation process is how you communicate throughout the process with your stakeholders. Generating ownership, but also, you need to be a good politician. You need to use your networks in the organization. You need to use communication with the governing bodies, with the board, to ensure that the message is conveyed in a language that they understand at the right time. And again, as a general heuristic, general rule, when your evaluation includes critical findings, experience has taught us that the operations side or other stakeholders, they can take critical lessons. They can accept that things go wrong and that there are things to learn. What they cannot accept is surprise. So you cannot ambush operations or management with critical findings in front of the board, or you cannot embarrass countries for bad performance. That will just create needless animosity. Informing your stakeholders early on in the process that there are some critical findings coming out of an evaluation is a very important part of the job. And then you will also usually arrive at a situation where you can explain where these critical findings come from, and they will also be more likely to be accepted then. So some final reflections on evaluation use. First of all, there's the eternal question of accountability versus, or accountability and learning. I think there's not really, it's a misunderstood dichotomy. Sometimes accountability is understood as, the need to cover everything, all interventions with all questions. That is a wrong understanding, in my view, of accountability. I think we can also achieve accountability through promoting good learning about our interventions. We need to learn about success and failure, about what works and why, and how, under what circumstances, through the evaluation process, through having focused and in-depth evaluations, and also through developing, in some cases, more formative, more forward-looking evaluation exercises. And if we develop them, if we do that successfully, then the organization learns, which in itself, I think, is a characteristic of accountability. It is important to think about what competencies do you need to enhance evaluation use. Evaluators or evaluation teams need to have good managers. They need to have good researchers. They need to have good networkers. They need to have good politicians. So you need all these competencies if you want to be influential with your evaluation. In many of the large multilateral development banks, but also in the larger UN organizations, there's still a lot of output behavior in terms of churning out evaluations of projects by the dozens, by the hundreds, and not all of these evaluations are well planned or well resourced or even relevant given what they are covering. And this very much relates to a point that was developed by the Swiss economist Bruno Frey, who talks about the disease called evaluitis. And the lesson here is it is better to do less but better evaluation rather than doing just many evaluations. The fourth important point is that you really need to think about who is your audience for your evaluation. In case of large MDBs and large UN organizations, the principal audience for the independent evaluation function is the board of directors, the board of member states, parliaments, and you need to present these audiences with big picture, very strategic messages. But at the same time, a secondary audience is also senior management from these organizations, so part of the operational part. And they often require more nuanced and more detailed knowledge. So you have to know who are you writing your evaluation for? And as a general challenge, in many evaluations, insufficiently there is attention paid to feedback loops to partners within the let's say field of intervention that you're evaluating, country level partners in government and the private sector, and also beneficiaries. It is important to that UN and MDB evaluation functions prioritize more reaching these audiences directly. Which also relates to my last point. We have gone through a number of decades of institutionalization of evaluation in the UN and MDB system, where primarily evaluations are done by evaluation functions in these organizations for these organizations. Now, that is not a theory of evaluation design, implementation, and use that fits the current times. More and more countries with which we work, developing countries, have incipient or even well-developed evaluation systems and incipient and well-developed evaluation cultures. And we should involve national expertise and national systems and processes much more in our evaluation work. So that is something that is very much a challenge for the future. I am happy to note that we are already let's say, relying more on country-led evaluations. We are involving more and more national experts in our evaluations, but this is something that really has to change significantly going forward. And with that final point, I would like to close my presentation, and thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jos. We're so excited to have heard what you shared with us. There's a lot of really great stuff in there. And I want to go ahead and open it up to questions or discussion. And we do have a few already in the chat ready for you. So let's start with Alison. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. But they ask, what are the causes of the indirect use and non-use?
You're muted, Dr. Vaessen.
Oh, sorry. That is an excellent question. Determinants of evaluation use there are many of those. I would make the important point by saying that evaluation is a political process. That means at the operations level, people do not like being evaluated. We as evaluators, we think our evaluation is so important so we can learn, etc. But many times evaluation from the operation side is understood as a threat or as something that is inefficient, something that holds back the operational work. So it is our job to convince our partners in the organization, but also outside of the organization, that evaluations can be very useful and that they are also a very important building block behind the reputation and credibility of what we do. Causes for lack of use are the fact that you cannot convince different stakeholders of the merit and worth of evaluations themselves, or that a particular evaluant is very sensitive and stakeholders do not want you to look into the kitchen, or it may also be related to the fact that the evaluation function itself has not done a quality job in the past and has undermined its reputation, and therefore is dismissed in the following reputation. So I see it also a little bit as an ongoing process. You have to, as an evaluation function, you have to build up your reputation that you can provide credible and relevant knowledge. And if you cannot do that, then every next evaluation will be more difficult. So let me stop here. There's more to say about this topic.
No, thank you. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying about what skill sets do you need on your team. And so maybe communicating your evaluation is a skill set that you would want to strengthen if your evaluation is not being used, right? Or relationship building or some other skill like that. So yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, and related to that, in building rapport, Monica Azahara asks how to establish an effective feedback loop so that we're not, damaging that rapport, keeping that continuous communication. Are there any best practices that you can refer to, or any tips or tricks?
Of course, I'm talking from the perspective of a large bureaucracy where a lot of these things are formalized, and I realize that in other parts of the international development landscape, things may be organized differently, the impact investing or NGO environments. But in our case, what is very important is to have a ongoing consultation with the main parts of the organization who you're evaluating, and making sure that evaluation is understood, the role of it, but also trying really your best to define topics of evaluation that are also useful for the operations part. So as an independent evaluation function, we have a role to develop an evaluation plan that covers what the organization does. So we are accountable to those that pay for the work of the World Bank. But in order to make this work internally, you have to be as relevant as possible. So having ongoing consultations with different parts of the organization is very important. Being as understanding as possible for their constraints and their opportunity spaces is very important as well. So showing that you understand the constraints and opportunities of the circumstances in which they work, and have that influence what you evaluate and how you analyze also your data and how you develop your findings, that is something that helps build relationships of trust and therefore strengthen the feedback loops between what is evaluated and how you use and how the evaluation findings are used in practice.
Thank
I
you.
hope that makes sense.
That makes sense to me.
Okay.
Another question here from Ruta is, from your experience, to what extent are evaluation results and reports used? Who uses the evaluation findings and results in an organization, for instance?
Very, very diverse. So there are examples, evaluations that are spectacularly non-used and that disappear almost as soon as they have seen the light of day, because of all sorts of reasons. Because there was no good relationship with different stakeholders in the process, because the evaluation report is considered to be too weak in terms of understanding the complexity of the work that is being done by the organization and other stakeholders, or because it is considered too critical or too insensitive. So there are many examples of non-use. There are many examples of good use as well. And I think those evaluations that are most successful are those evaluations that are really timely for the board. So the board wants to have advice fast. So sometimes we have to come in very fast with evaluative synthesis, or we have to time our evaluations very well so the board can have our evaluative evidence to have an informed discussion about a particular strategy. Those are the most influential ones for the board. For management, the most influential ones are the ones that really generate useful information for them. Because let's not forget that our colleagues in operations and our colleagues in country governments and in the private sector with which we work are experts. They are smart people in general. So you cannot come with superficial findings or superficial guidance. So if you really can offer them added value in terms of the findings that are being generated, then they are likely to be more appreciated and used, obviously. And second, if you can do something in the evaluation process, which can also help the operational side learn, but they simply don't have the time for it, but you help them learn, that is also appreciated. For example, we have collaborated with a lot of our operations colleagues in the bank, but also in government in the countries which we work, to help them improve their theories of change and their results frameworks and their understanding of, and clarifying their understanding of how they are, let's say, trying to address certain problems that they want to address, and how they are measuring success and how they can course correct. So with that type of support through training or interactive workshops, you create also goodwill, not just for the evaluation function, but also for the particular evaluation that you may be working on. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
That makes sense. I want to kind of conglomerate some of these questions. There are some similar ones coming up, and I want to piggyback off of what you already were saying. So I'm just gonna jump a little bit. There's a question from Alsan Idealu saying, can the perception of stakeholders of an imposed evaluation imposed by donors harm the equality or the quality of evaluation? Excuse me. Does that make sense? The way you're muted again, Dr. Vaessen.
Yeah. So, okay. So first of all, if the main purpose of the evaluation is to inform our board, then for that evaluation, we develop the evaluation for the board. But in some cases, our purpose is also to inform operations and also our partners. And it's very important that our partners have a strong say in what we evaluate and how we evaluate it as well. Evaluations are part of the deal, of the contract that you make with the government for them to receive a large loan of hundreds of millions of dollars, for example. But you also want to make sure that the government that receives, in case of the World Bank, that money, that there is learning and accountability for what takes place in the country. So I think for the second part, imposing an evaluation should always is not a good term. You cannot impose. I think the right way to approach this is to see the evaluation as an opportunity to engage. And that engagement should be as participatory as possible. And in my personal experience, having worked in, 50 countries, the best evaluations are the ones that have strong national expertise. We should really, I don't think anybody still has that in his or her head, but we should really depart from the thinking that there are better experts in international organizations rather than in the countries themselves. That's not the case. In most cases, the best expertise is in the countries. So I think also having experts take a leading role in evaluations that we conduct already is cognizant of the fact that these experts bring on board institutional knowledge, not just technical knowledge and substance knowledge, but also institutional knowledge of how evaluations can best be scoped and conducted. That was a long-winded response for the question, I think, and more can be said about it, but let me stop here.
It sounds like we need another webinar, frankly. Thank you so much for that explanation.
Yeah, and building off what you were just speaking about, there's a couple of questions about building evaluation capacity in countries where World Bank functions. And so I tried to mesh these two, and so hopefully we get to kind of the heart of both of them. But how does World Bank help countries develop capacity for evaluation? And in those countries where World Bank operates, is there a standard percentage or amount of local expertise that's required to be involved to support that capacity building?
Thank you. That's a good question. So we try to contribute to building national evaluation cultures and capabilities in multiple ways. Through the World Bank's operations, there is funding for M&E support often in certain countries, in certain projects. But also we as an independent evaluation function have a mandate to support evaluation capacity building. And we do that primarily through a program that is called the Global Evaluation Initiative, which is a kind of a separate program in which we bundle all our evaluation capacity development activities. For example, the Global Evaluation Initiative supports 6 centers in Chile, Brazil, Senegal, South Africa, India, and Pakistan to build capacities in government and the private sector on evaluation. We also have lots of training programs, and one of them is the International Program for Development Evaluation Training. And I see actually that my colleague Steffi Krapp here is online. She is the head of that program, and we give courses annually at the University of Bern to about 150, 200 participants, many of them from developing countries, about evaluation. And we have a number of other evaluation training programs that we fund or implement through the centers that I mentioned. That is also an important capacity development mechanism. And finally, we also how do you say that we have the platform Better Evaluation, in which we share knowledge about good practices in evaluation through that platform, and colleagues can find guidance on evaluation practice and evaluation systems there. And there are a number of other activities related to that. So yes, we think evaluation capacity development is very important. It's one of our core tasks. And in the end, what we want to achieve, what we want to go to is a system in which countries lead their own evaluations managed through their own systems and processes. And we can use that evaluative knowledge to inform, for example, the boards and stakeholders of the World Bank. In some countries that is definitely a possibility. In other countries it will take more time because the political conditions are not present for that to happen, for example.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's another question. So this is from 2 different audience members. So Ifin Anyi, I hope I pronounced that right, wants a little bit more clarification on evaluitis. I think that goes into play with working with those additional stakeholders. And then a question about when using an evaluation to create an action plan, what is an effective way of helping decision makers prioritize proposed activities? I think maybe that goes hand in hand with that evaluitis term you used.
Yeah. So let us distinguish between the large in larger UN organizations and MDBs. There are a limited number of evaluations, very high level evaluations, that are presented to the board. I don't think there's much evaluators there, although there also the rule, less but better is important. But I think the number and type of evaluations is in line with the absorption capacity of the governing bodies. So we're not bombarding them constantly with new evaluations. But the evaluation, the organizations themselves, the broader evaluation system, project level evaluations or other decentralized or embedded evaluations, some of them are very well scoped, very well planned, of very high quality, well communicated, and very influential. But good evaluation, influential evaluation requires resources. And we see too many instances where evaluations is a compulsory kind of task that is connected to a project cycle and is not taken seriously. And therefore the resources are not efficiently and cost effectively used. And I think we need to reflect on what is the best evaluation strategy for an organizational system. Do you want everything evaluated kind of rapidly, or do you want more selective, strategically influential evaluation? So I think that is a question that we are thinking about, but that we definitely have not yet resolved. And there's also a lot of symbolic use. There are many countries who think, if we give money to a UN organization, they should evaluate it, but they are not really necessarily profoundly interested in the evaluation. So I wonder also whether that is always the best use of evaluation resources. And then we have, of course, the situation where, let's say we work in Liberia in the health sector, and there are more than 60 organizations that provide more than $1 million support to the health sector in Liberia. These 60 organizations, USAID is the biggest, and World Bank Group is the second biggest, but there are 60 more. All of them fund and implement large and small programs, and all of them separately evaluate what is going on. And sometimes the government or other local organizations are not even involved. That is not the optimal solution for learning and accountability in a sector, in a country. There should be a coordinated evaluation strategy that is coordinated from the Ministry of Health, where hopefully all the donors can align to and basically decide together what is the best use of our evaluation resources for the accountability and learning needs of all parties involved. Now, unfortunately, that sounds too idealistic, and that is too far away from practice, but I think that is what we need to move toward. So I think national institutions need to be further empowered, and donor institutions need to reduce their fragmentation of evaluative work. And then your second question, could you repeat that one? So I can also briefly respond to that. Sorry.
There was also a carry-on about cost-benefit analysis. I'll pull up the question from our very own David Anderson, an alumni from our program. So I just want to quickly shout him out for such a great question. He was asking about how decision makers prioritize proposed activities in terms of potential costs and benefits.
As a part of their action plans, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So as evaluators, I think we have to be very careful at what we can say, right? I think we should stick to our analysis. Our analysis leads to certain findings, and these findings point at certain recommendations. But we should not be under the illusion that we can determine what practically should be done. Maybe in very simple project situations, the evaluators can say a little bit more because they have a deep understanding. But when you are evaluating a large portfolio of different interventions, and you are looking more at a strategic level, there's a lot of complexity involved in how a particular high-level finding and recommendation can translate into practice. So leave the action plan to the ones that really know how to implement that. You can have a conversation with the operational part, but you cannot, as evaluators, determine that. And I think the operations side is very clear that cost efficiency is a very important determinant. If anything, our colleagues on the operations side are constantly under budget pressure, so they will definitely be trying to find the most cost-efficient solutions. Maybe evaluators need to be there to also assure that sometimes more expensive solutions can be better to solve a particular issue. I hope that responds to your question.
Yes, and so I want to ask a question as well, and one is kind of a functional question and one is selfish. So the first is, how do you approach critical feedback early in the evaluation cycle? You know, you had mentioned that's a better way to approach it as opposed to kind of airing all the laundry out, for instance, in front of many stakeholders. What's the best approach you've used? And the second question that's selfish is, what kind of career path or experience should someone have to start down this path and end up working in evaluation in this setting?
Okay, thank you. Two very good, quite different questions. On sharing bad news, I mean, most of the large UN organizations and the large MDBs, they have a hierarchy and evaluation as well. So you have evaluation managers, you have evaluation directors, and you have evaluation team leaders, and you have evaluators and evaluation analysts. So there are different hierarchical levels. And these different hierarchical levels also have to do with comparative advantages, what people are good at. So evaluation directors and managers are particularly strong at strategic dialogue with the board and senior management, and team leaders are particularly good at dialogue with technical counterparts. So for each of these levels, there's a kind of a consultation task here. From a team leader perspective and from a manager perspective, I would say that it is very important that you have a good dialogue throughout the evaluation, because even though you think you have the best methods and the best data and the best experts, there's a lot of tacit knowledge that you don't know. You need to validate what you know. You need to really triangulate constantly. And you need to also be in touch with your evaluation colleagues to take on board what is important for them. And in that same process, you can start preparing them for bad news. And depending on the organization, the topic, and of course, on the counterparts, it really depends on how that goes. But in the World Bank, at least, I have the sense that if you come with convincing evidence-based findings, in most cases, that is acceptable. People accept it. If you are able to also understand the constraints under which colleagues work, because the assumption is that operations colleagues are not trying to fail. They are not trying to do things wrong. Everybody's learning here. It's a very complex world. And we are not trying to, slap them on the wrist. We are trying to help the organizations to learn and find better solutions, to course correct, etc. So that is a joint process. And I think we should understand the comparative advantages that we have as evaluators and also our operations colleagues in that process. So good dialogue, good understanding, regular consultation can help to bring bad news successfully and help the organization learn. That's to your first question. The second question, how can you develop a career in independent evaluation in the United Nations or in the multilateral development bank sector? There is no singular career path. There are multiple ones. I would say that if you look at what is needed in an evaluation, there are different types of competencies. You need very strong research skills. You need deep sectoral or substantive knowledge. You need good project management knowledge. You need institutional knowledge. So in practice, this means that we have young graduates coming from graduate programs with excellent technical knowledge and start as analysts, and then they grow into evaluators and eventually possibly even evaluation team leaders and managers. That's one path. The other path is that you start on the operational side. So you work on programs for years, and you really understand how particular instruments work, how working with governments in complex environments works. You develop sectoral expertise, and that expertise is also very important for evaluation. So you come in from the operations side. And then finally, but relatedly, you come in really from the sectoral expertise side. So we also have infrastructure experts, we have environmental experts, we have agriculture experts, education experts. That could also be a pathway into the evaluation field in independent evaluation. So different pathways.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vaessen. So we have only a few minutes, not even since we're almost at the hour, but I'm going to posit one other question. In the Master of Measurement and Evaluation program at American University, we were able to partake in a course on systems and complexity in evaluation. And we're really curious about how the World Bank integrates some of these concepts. So if you have any notes or anything that you can reflect on for us, how you use systems and complexity at the World Bank.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I made the caveat at the beginning of my presentation. We're talking about large UN and large MDBs, and there are more than hundreds of those. I mean, MDBs and UN organizations, and then there are even other multilaterals. The World Bank itself has 20,000 staff members and more than 100 offices, and so it's difficult for me to speak for the World Bank. So how do we deal with complexity? I think we deal with complexity in a number of ways. Operationally speaking, the World Bank is an organization that invests a lot in research and diagnostics. So a lot of analysis is being done in a particular country to understand what are the priorities, what are some of the, what is the situation around inequality, poverty, ecosystems, climate change, adaptation, etc. A lot of diagnostics that inform the dialogue with the government or with the private sector on where the World Bank can help with finance or advisory work or technical assistance. So that is, I think, a very important way to deal with complexity. And evaluation dealing with complexity is that we wrote a whole book about it, and we published it in 2016. It's by Sage Publications, Michael Bamberger, myself, and another colleague, dealing with complexity in development evaluation. There are different strategies for doing that. You can ask holistic, big picture questions. You can unpack the evaluant when you're talking about country programs or thematic areas of work into different packages of projects or policy instruments. You can use all sorts of systems tools like network analysis or systems modeling to understand the interactions in a sector, for example, or in an institutional landscape. There are different ways when you can analytically deal with complexity and make sense of it. And maybe you want to take a look at that publication or the other very rich literature on this topic. But I think it's something that we struggle with as evaluators, because we are trained to look at the intervention that we support in a very intervention-centric way, and systems thinking is not necessarily our strength. So to look at a whole sector and all the different institutions that support that sector and the interactions and the coherence between is more difficult for an evaluator than looking at the single intervention or the set of interventions that are supported by the organization for which we evaluate.
May we have the title of that publication with you and Michael Bamberger?
It's called Dealing with Complexity in Development Evaluation by Sage Publications.
Thank you.
Well, this has been wonderful, Dr. Vaessen. Thank you so much for your time You've led us through a lot of information looking at evaluation functions, those independent, embedded, or even researcher impact evaluation level functions. Lots of differences between the UN system and the multilateral development banks, and then the different patterns across those systems. So the different uses, the different non-uses, and how to kind of embed things, even within your theory of change, that can help to increase the likelihood of your evaluation being used. I think particularly your reflections there at the end were really helpful in thinking about concepts that come up throughout evaluation, but maybe aren't as, kind of to the forefront as your framework or something like that. So I appreciated those reflections as well. So thank you to Dr. Vaessen for speaking today, and to all of you in the audience for joining. We were so glad to have you and your great questions. We appreciate the time you spent with us today speaking about evaluation use in multilateral development organizations. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Yasmin
everyone.
and Gabby.
Thank you.